Hercule Poirot and the Shadow That Had No Owner. Chapter 1. The Echo in the Gallery. The palace of the Marquise de Bellois, perched on the cliffs of Étretat, seemed like a dream from another century. With its limestone facade, sea salt eroded gargoyles, and private art gallery open only to select guests, it was the ideal setting for a crime that, more than blood, would spill secrets. It was the eve of the exhibition Reflections of Silence, a private collection of surrealist paintings by the eccentric artist Otto Le Marchand, who had died a decade earlier under circumstances that have never been clarified. The Marquise, Henrietta Seux, imposing widow with an impenetrable personality, had decided to open her gallery to the public for the first and last time. A limited list of guests, collectors, critics, art dealers, and 2 old personal friends, was sent out with handwritten cards sealed with dark blue wax. The storm outside gave the event a ceremonial air. Inside, under the dim light of the antique chandeliers, the paintings seemed to observe those present with secret eyes. Among those present were Jacques Dupré, the nervous young curator who organized the exhibition; Mrs. Élodie Favre, a scathing art critic feared by all living artists; Electric Dr. Lucien Gardet, retired psychiatrist and friend of Le Marchand; Maximilien Roche, an art dealer with a reputation as a manipulator; Claire Belloy, niece of the Marquise, recently arrived from Geneva; Inspector Morel, invited as a courtesy, although without an official function. At 9 o'clock sharp, champagne was served in the Hall of Mirrors. At 9:20, a scream was heard from the north wing. It was Dupré who uttered it, pale as a ghost. He ran from the central gallery, stammering, "The shadow! There is a shadow that projects no body!" They all ran, pushing each other like figures, from a Baroque nightmare to the octagonal hall where Le Marchand's most famous painting hung, The Shadow Without an Owner. But what they found was not a desecrated painting. Era Maximilien Roche, lying at the foot of the painting, his eyes open in an expression of silent horror. Dead. There were no wounds. There was no blood. Only a faint smell of bitter almonds, and the mysterious detail that the painting, once intact, now had a thin crack running across its surface, as if it had contained for a second more than it could bear. It was at that moment that the Marquise, with her deep and elegant voice, whispered, "Call Hercule Poirot." And the next day from London came the little Belgian with his perfectly waxed moustache and his gaze that seemed to pierce the conscience of everyone present. With a slight nod, he addressed the Marquise and said, "Madame, art is a mirror of the soul. But there are mirrors that give back more than what one puts in front of them." And so began the investigation that would reveal not only a murder, but also psychological wounds, decades of deception, and a shadow that had never had an owner. Chapter 2. The Eyes of the Painting. Hercule Poirot strolled calmly around the octagonal living room, as if taking the air in a private garden. Maximilien Roche's body had been removed after the arrival of the local gendarmerie, but the atmosphere remained tense. Le Marchand's painting still hung on the same wall, although it looked different now. Perhaps it was the crack that ran diagonally across it like a scar. Or perhaps it was the collective suggestion that made everyone look at it with suspicion. Poirot stopped a few inches from the painting. The shadow without an owner it showed a blurred figure, its back turned, walking down a windowless hallway. There was no face, No details in the silhouette. Only the shadow, projected forward, impossible according to the logic of light. The disturbing effect was undeniable. "Curious, very curious," murmured Poirot, taking out a small silver comb and carefully adjusting his moustache. "What do you want to tell us, mon cher Le Marchand?" Claire Bellois, young and elegant, in a black satin blouse and an expression of perpetual doubt, approached timidly. "Monsieur Poirot, do you think he was murdered? I mean, Roche, there are no visible signs." Dr. Gardet said it could have been a heart attack. Poirot didn't reply immediately. He turned to Claire, studying her for a second that felt like an eternity. "Mademoiselle." Roche didn't look at the painting the way one looks at a work of art. His expression was one of absolute terror. "And tell me, what kind of heart attack leaves the scent of almonds in the air?" Claire hesitated. "Poison? Exactly. Cyanide, maybe. Or something more elaborate, less detectable. I'm not a toxicologist, but the police will investigate that. I focus on human contradictions, and there's one that already intrigues me." Before he could say more, Inspector Morel, nervous and sweaty, entered the room. "Monsieur Poirot, the preliminary interviews are ready. We can begin whenever you like." "Thank you, Inspector. We'll start with the person who found the body." Jacques Duprat was visibly shaken. His face was sweaty, his hands trembling. Poirot asked him to describe exactly what he saw. I was checking the room temperature. Le Marchand's paintings are very sensitive to humidity. I went in with the digital thermometer. I saw the painting, and then I saw him. Roche. He was already on the floor. And there was something else. Yeah? The shadow. The shadow in the painting seemed different, darker, as if it had lengthened. Poirot stared at him. "Do you think the shadow moved?" "I don't know. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But at that moment I felt something strange. Like there was another presence in the room. And then I smelled that very strong scent." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Duprat. Don't worry. Memories under pressure often seem illogical. The important thing is how we articulate them." When Jacques left, Poirot turned to Morel. "Inspector, are there any medical records for Mr. Roche? We haven't met them yet, but he had a reputation for being in good shape. Then rule out a heart attack until the tests say otherwise." Poirot walked once more towards the painting. An impossible shadow, a dead merchant, a canvas that seems to have a mind of its own. "No, mon ami," he whispered to himself, "this isn't art. It's a painted confession." And at the edges of the canvas, right where the crack originated, Poirot saw something else. An almost invisible trace, like fresh varnish. Why would someone touch this painting just before the exhibition? With his little grey cells already buzzing, Poirot asked for the following interviews to be arranged. Art could be a mirror, yes, but some mirrors don't just reflect, they also hide. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Varnish. Hercule Poirot settled himself into a small Louis XV armchair by the unlit fireplace. Facing him, her face impassive and her lips painted to mathematical perfection, was Mrs. Élodie Favre. She was wearing a plain dark blue dress, but her gaze was razor-sharp. The art critic didn't seem to be in mourning or surprised. Rather, she seemed annoyed by the evening's development. "Madame Favre," Poirot began, delicately crossing. His legs. You have known Roche for years, isn't that right? I knew his reputation, and I put up with it, he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. He was a parasite with drawing-room manners. His interest in art was purely financial. Poirot raised his eyebrows with delight. And yet you agreed to come to an exhibition he organized. For the Marquise, not for him, and for Le Marchand. The last time I saw one of his works in public was in Vienna. The Shadow Without an Owner. It's a disturbing piece, and unique. No one has been able to fully decipher it, not even his widow. "Widow?" interrupted Poirot. "Oh, you didn't know? Le Marchand was married to a much younger woman. After her death, he disappeared from the art world. Some say he went into seclusion. Others say he signed paintings under a pseudonym, but no one knows for sure." Poirot bowed slightly. "And you, madame, do you think Le Marchand was a tormented genius?" "I think he was a sick man. His paintings were a disguised cry. In this work, for example, look at the margins. There's always something hidden where no one looks." Poirot smiled. "That's what I think. Where were you at 9:15 exactly?" "In front of the mirror in the east hallway. I'm uncomfortable with crowds, even if they're drinking expensive champagne." "Ask Dr. Gardet. He greeted me just before I entered the room. He can confirm that." Poirot nodded and, with a gesture, asked Morel to show the next guest. Dr. Lucien. Gardet he walked in slowly, leaning on a dark wooden cane, with white hair and a kind expression. He looked more like a librarian than a psychiatrist. "Monsieur Poirot," he said softly, "if you're looking for answers in logic, I warn you, Le Marchand lived outside of it. And yet your painting is rigorously symmetrical," Poirot retorted. "Tell me, doctor, what was your relationship with Roche like?" "Cordial, nothing more. Roche seemed unsettling to me. He was charming, but you could sense the coldness beneath his smile. Sometimes he said things as if he knew you were hiding something, even if it was a lie. And you had something to hide." Gardet smiled sadly. "Monsieur Poirot, everyone here is hiding something, but not everyone would kill for it." Poirot did not look away. "Where were you when the body was discovered?" "In the library, leafing through the exhibition catalogue. I have a habit of reviewing each work's information. Jacques Dupré can corroborate this. He came to ask me for the time minutes before the scandal." "And what do you think about the Shadow Without an Owner?" "I think Le Marchand placed his greatest pain on her. He had a perceptual disorder. He claimed to see shadows where there weren't any, and he said one of them was following him." Poirot remained silent for a few seconds. "Delirium? The symbol? Sometimes, monsieur, there is no difference." When Gardet had left, Poirot approached the canvas again. He ran a gloved finger along the bottom edge, right where the crack began. With a pocket magnifying glass, he examined the varnish. And there, almost imperceptible, he found a print. Not a fingerprint, but a faint trace of fabric, with blue fibres, as if someone had touched the painting with a glove. "A blue glove," he murmured. Morel approached. "Did you discover anything?" "Just a contradiction. And contradictions, Inspector, are the cracks through which the truth enters." Poirot already had his next interview in mind. Claire Bellois, the niece, whose arrival coincided all too well with the exhibition and with the death. Chapter 4. The Bear. silent niece Claire Beloy waited on the covered terrace, where the sea breeze whispered steadily through the latticed windows. She held an untouched glass of wine, her gaze lost beyond the horizon, as if the ocean might absorb her thoughts. When Poirot approached, she straightened quickly, but without feigning surprise. "Would you like to speak with me privately, Monsieur Poirot?" "If I may, mademoiselle," he said politely. "Sometimes the breeze helps the words come out more easily. You arrived from Geneva only 3 days ago, didn't you?" "Yes. My aunt invited me very insistently. We hadn't seen each other since my mother's funeral." Poirot settled into the chair opposite her, studying not so much her words as her micro-gestures, the slight blink at the mention of her mother, the way she held her glass without drinking, the tension in her knuckles. "And did you know Mr. Roche?" "By name only. My aunt mentioned him in letters, saying he was useful, though slippery. I didn't meet him directly until yesterday, when I was introduced to him at the pre-dinner meeting." "And what impression did it give you?" Claire hesitated. Her voice dropped a half-note. "He was charming. Too charming. He knew how to flatter, but you felt like there was calculation behind every smile. He asked me personal things, about my studies, my finances. I didn't understand why he was so interested." Poirot slowly interlaced his fingers. "Do you feel like he was investigating you?" "Maybe, but I didn't have time to check. This morning I saw him enter the octagonal room alone. He seemed nervous. He was holding a sealed envelope." Poirot bowed slightly towards her. "An envelope? Yes, cream-coloured, like the kind on fine stationery." He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he saw me and smiled, as if he knew something I didn't. Poirot stood up gently. "Thank you, mademoiselle. One last question. Do you have any blue gloves?" Claire frowned, genuinely puzzled. "Yes, suede ones. I use them for driving. Why?" "Oh, pure aesthetic curiosity," Poirot said with a smile. "Blue, well chosen, reflects elegance without rigidity." Back at the house, Poirot headed straight for Inspector Morel's makeshift office. Morel looked up from some papers. "Anything useful?" "Perhaps. Mr. Roche was carrying an envelope this morning. Claire Beloy saw it. Was it found among his belongings?" Morel shook his head. "Nothing in his pockets, just his wallet, some coins, and a handkerchief." "So that envelope disappeared." Poirot thought for a moment. "Inspector, have a discreet search conducted to see if anyone in the house keeps blue suede gloves. Don't cause alarm, just observe. Gloves? Do you think—" Poirot raised a hand. "I don't think so. I'm observing." That evening, while the guests dined with the absent appetite of those feigning normalcy after a death, Poirot requested a private inspection of Maximilien Roche's bedroom. The room smelled of expensive cologne and old leather. On the desk next to a marble ashtray, he found what he was looking for. A small notebook with the top pages torn out, but the marks still visible. He took out a blank sheet of paper, placed it on top, and gently ran a pencil over it. Little by little, a sentence emerged written in a firm hand. Claire B. "You won't deny it when you see what I have." Poirot contemplated the words for a long moment, then folded the sheet with great precision and put it in his jacket. There you have it. Shadows don't appear on their own. They always need a light to project them. The enigma was more intimate than it seemed. Chapter 5. The Secrets of a Lost Envelope. The next morning, the sky over Étretat was covered with thick clouds, as if the sea itself had exhaled a grey sigh. In the dining room, the diners avoided each other's gaze. Even the most talkative, like Dr. Gardet and Madame Favre, seemed plunged into a tense silence. Only Poirot seemed oblivious to the funereal atmosphere, as he meticulously spread bitter orange marmalade on a slice of bread. Inspector Morel entered unannounced, with a notebook in his hand. "Monsieur Poirot, as you requested, we have discreetly searched the guests' belongings. We found 3 pairs of blue gloves. 2 were synthetic leather, unused recently. The third, a pair of suede with traces of pigment, indigo blue, property of Claire Belloy." Poirot nodded without surprise. "Don't confiscate them yet. The important thing isn't who has them, but when they were used. And the envelope? Nothing. The cream sachet hasn't turned up. But one of the servants, Paul, remembers seeing Roche arguing with Madame Favre that very morning. In the garden. Discussion? Yes. She said something like, 'If you insist on showing it, you're leaving me no choice.' Roche replied, 'The painting says it all, but the paper screams it.'" Poirot stood up, delicately wiping his hands. "Inspector, we have 2 paths, one that shouts and one that hides in the silence of art. I prefer to follow both." In the gallery lounge, Poirot met Jacques Dupré, who was checking the humidity levels again. "Monsieur Dupré, a small question. Did anyone touch the painting, the shadow, without an owner after you found the body?" "Not that I know of. I ran to get help immediately. When I returned with Inspector Morel, everything was the same." Poirot walked up to the picture and stopped. The crack was still there, thin but visible. But now, looking closely, Poirot noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small edge of paper, barely visible from the lower frame, almost imperceptible. Ah, my children, the impatience of a murderer always leaves a trace. Wearing gloves, he carefully removed the paper. It was the cream-coloured envelope, barely folded, tucked behind the canvas like someone hiding a letter in the fold of a book. Inside, a single sheet of paper with black ink. Shadow over his signature. Forged certificate of authenticity. Belloy. Roche knew. Poirot folded the letter expressionlessly, but his eyes narrowed slightly. The surname was there. Belloy. Not Claire, not La Marquise. Just the surname. Hours later, Poirot requested a private conversation with the Marquise in her greenhouse, surrounded by purple orchids. "Madame," he said gently, "could you tell me about your relationship with Otto le Marchand?" The Marquise crossed her hands elegantly. "It was stormy. I protected him, I promoted him. But I also demanded a lot from him. I believed in his talent more than he did himself. And did you sign certificates of authenticity for work sold after your death?" A slight trembling of his left eyelid was the only immediate response. "You think I'm capable of that?" "I don't think so, madame." "I observe. Roche found something. He wanted to use it. Blackmail? Maybe. But someone wasn't willing to let that happen." The Marquise stood up, majestic. "I will not stoop to arguing with you without proof." So, let's not argue. But let me tell you, a painting can lie, but its frame never does. As Poirot withdrew, his gaze once again shifted to the crack in the painting. It was no longer just a flaw. It was an entrance, a door, and on the other side the truth awaited. Chapter 6. The Artist Who Didn't Sign. As evening descended on the Marquise's palace, a dim light cast the walls a faded grey. Poirot requested that the gallery be closed to the public, not for security reasons, but because, he said, paintings listen better when there are no witnesses. With Morel following close behind, the detective again inspected every corner of the octagonal room, this time looking not for footprints, but for echoes. "Inspector, do you know what disturbs me about this crime?" Morel shrugged. "Everything, I guess." "No, not everything. What disturbs me is that no one has mourned Maximilien Roche's death. Not a single tear, not even real indignation. It's as if his disappearance were a tacit settling of scores. He was a nasty man, they say. Precisely. And unpleasant men who discover dangerous secrets usually die before they can fully reveal them." Poirot stopped before the shadow. Without an owner, this time he looked not at the central figure, but at a small lower right corner. There, where the painter's signature would normally be, was nothing. "Don't you find it curious, Inspector, that this work, Le Marchand's most famous, is unsigned? Maybe it was part of his style. He was eccentric." Poirot shook his head. "No, no, no. The artist's ego is like that of a murderer. It wants to be recognized. If this work isn't signed, it's because he didn't want it attributed to its author. What if it wasn't painted by Le Marchand? Falsification. Worse. Something more intimate. An appropriation." Morel opened his mouth, but was interrupted by the hurried arrival of Jacques Dupré. "Monsieur Poirot, they've just discovered something. In the fireplace of the guest room in the east wing, someone tried to burn papers this morning. Some pieces remained intact." Poirot hurried to the east wing. On the fireplace, among the warm ashes, he found still legible scraps of paper. One had a faded letterhead, Art Gallery, Geneva. Another one showed the letters B-E-L-L. But the most revealing was a piece of smudged ink that still read, "Reproduction rights reserved. Do not display without verification of origin." "My God," Poirot whispered, "this is no longer just a crime of blood. It's a crime of authorship." They returned to the gallery. Poirot asked for Claire Bellois to be brought in once more. When she arrived, something in her posture had changed. She was more erect. She no longer seemed fragile, but restrained, like a dam before. "It breaks. Mademoiselle," said Poirot pleasantly, "you studied art in Geneva. Isn't that right?" "Yeah. And she knew Le Marchand's work since she was little. My mother was his patron. And yet you never mentioned that you painted." Claire pressed her lips together. "I didn't consider it relevant." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oh, but it is. The shadow without an owner. It's not signed. And you were absent from the country precisely during the months when this painting mysteriously appeared, following the master's death. I dare say, it's not Le Marchand's work. It's yours." Claire looked down for a second, and when she looked up again, her eyes shone with a mixture of pride and pain. "He asked me to. she said softly. He knew he was going to die. He wanted one last work to be created under his name, to keep his legend alive. He taught me everything he knew. I painted under his direction. It was our secret, and Roche discovered it. Claire nodded slowly. Yes, he threatened to reveal it. He said there was a copy of the original sales contract, with me listed as the author. It was going to ruin everything. My reputation, les marchands, the galleries, my aunts. Poirot said nothing. He just watched her, without judging her. Then, in a calm voice, he asked the question that had been floating around in his head for days. "Did you kill him?" Claire stood up, taking a deep breath. "No, but his. Death didn't surprise me," Poirot sighed. "It wasn't the end. Not yet. But the circle was closing. The motive was clear. The only thing left was to find out who, in that palace full of shadows, dared to project a definitive one." Chapter 7. A Shadow in the Mirror. Night fell with unexpected swiftness, as if day had fled from the truths that were beginning to reveal themselves. In the Marquise's study, Poirot contemplated his reflection in an antique Venetian mirror. The figure that returned to him was not only his own, but also that of doubt, the silhouette of a truth that was still incomplete. The Marquise de Bellois entered unannounced, wrapped in a green velvet shawl. Her steps were so soft that Poirot barely noticed her until she spoke. "Has my niece confessed?" "Only what she couldn't deny," said Poirot, turning elegantly. "But no, madame, she didn't kill Roche." The Marquise remained silent for a few seconds. Then, with a slightly bitter smile, she sat down by the fireplace. Maximilien Roche was a dangerous man, not because of what he knew, but because of how he used it. "So you admit that the work was painted by Claire?" "I don't admit it." "There," Marquise said in a harsh voice. "I only accept that Otto le Marchand, in his final months, lived surrounded by idealistic young men and impressionable women. What arose from that environment is debatable. But Roche wanted to turn it into a scandal, and he asked me for numbers with lots of zeros." Poirot leaned towards her. "Did you bribe him?" "I tried to reason with him. But Roche didn't negotiate with reason. He wanted the weight of scandal, the glory of exposing a fraud." Poirot looked at his folded hands. They were perfectly still. "Where were you exactly? At 9:20 last night?" "In my bedroom. My maid Mireille can confirm that." Poirot nodded. He had already questioned the maid. Her answer had been careful, but not definitive. Hours later, Poirot met Jacques Dupré in the library. The young curator looked exhausted, but also expectant. "Mr. Dupré, you worked for months on this exhibition. Did you know that the central work wasn't by Le Marchand?" Jacques froze. His eyes widened. "What? No, that's not. It can't be. Are you sure? You handled all the provenance documents. Did you ever notice any irregularities? A signature in a different style? A less tense handwriting?" Jacques rubbed his forehead. "There was, once. I sent the technical sheet to a gallery in Zurich to corroborate a fact. They told me the signature of authenticity was filed under the name Claire Bellois. I thought it was a clerical error. I ignored it." Poirot stood up slowly. "Ignorance is a form of complicity, monsieur. You protected Claire. Out of love, perhaps. Jacques blushed visibly. She doesn't even know. But yes, I always admired her. Her intelligence, her sensitivity, her strength. I couldn't imagine her reputation being destroyed over a technicality. And that's why you hid Roche's envelope behind the painting? Jacques blinked, frozen. What? No, I didn't do that. Poirot watched him, weighing every word. The young man's panic seemed genuine. And yet, the knowledge he had just revealed was key. He knew about the document before Roche died. He didn't need to kill him, but someone else did. Back in his room, Poirot jotted down in his black leather notebook, "The shadow isn't in the painting, it's between them." One of those present feared the truth more than scandal, not because of reputation, because of identity. What if the shadow was never Roche's nor Claire's, but someone whose entire life is built on a falsehood? He closed the notebook. His grave, calm gaze shifted toward the window where the moon was setting behind clouds. The killer was no longer hidden. He was just waiting for Poirot to make him talk. With one last trick. Chapter 8. The Grey Cells Play. In the morning, Poirot was already on the sunroom, eating his breakfast with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Warm bread roll, slightly bitter coffee, and a soft-boiled egg timed to 4 minutes. The rest of the house seemed still asleep, or pretending to be. The silence was thick, as if everyone was holding their breath. Inspector Morel joined him with a steaming cup of coffee and a tense expression. "Have you come to a conclusion, Monsieur Poirot?" "Oh, my dear Morel, not yet. But I'm close, very close. It all depends on one very simple question. Who had the most to lose if the painting's secret came to light?" Morel snorted. "Claire Bellois, are you sure?" Poirot cut his roll with precision. Claire would lose her reputation. The Marquise, perhaps, her prestige. But there's someone who would lose something much deeper. Her entire identity. Morel frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot put down his knife, wiped the corners of his mouth with a linen napkin, and stood up. "I'll call everyone to the library this afternoon. There, I'll reveal the truth. But first, I need one last piece." Hours later, Poirot walked through the conservatory toward the west wing. There, in a private room decorated with antique tapestries and classical busts, he found Dr. Lucien Gardet, leafing through a textbook on forensic medicine. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot greeted him politely. "I came to ask you an unusual question. Did you ever treat Otto le Marchand as a patient?" Gardet looked up, slowly, measuredly. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm intrigued by your intimate knowledge of Le Marchand's perceptual disorders, and because you seem to know more about the emotional content of the painting than anyone else here." The doctor put down the book. "He was my friend, or your patient." Gardet watched him silently. "Both. And were you the one who medicated him?" "Yes. In his final months he suffered from bouts of panic and paranoia. He said there was a shadow that wouldn't leave him. And that shadow had a shape. He never described it clearly." Poirot crossed his arms, his tone higher. Could that shadow be guilt? An entire life built on a lie, the garde Parpaillot. I don't understand. Really, doctor? Because I think you understand perfectly. Roche discovered that the shadow without an owner, it wasn't Le Marchand's work. He discovered the certificates, and something else too, an old letter signed by Le Marchand, in which he spoke of his true heir. Not Claire, not the Marquis. Gardet stood up abruptly. That's absurd. No, it isn't. Roche discovered that Le Marchand didn't just symbolically leave the painting to you. He discovered that your mentor was your biological father, and that you, Dr. Gardet, weren't adopted as you always believed. You were Le Marchand's hidden son, and the shadow was yours. Gardet was breathing heavily. Something in his eyes cracked. He wrote it to me 3 days before he died, but he begged me not to claim anything. He said art was a curse. He wanted me to live free of it. But then Claire painted the painting. Roche knew, and he used it to blackmail me. And you, Doctor, what did you do? I confronted him in the living room. He told me he'd call me the imposter of the century, that he'd reveal everything. The painting, the letter, my origins. I pushed him. It wasn't premeditated. He stumbled. He fell. The bottle of poison fell with him. I just took the envelope and hid it. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to shut up. Poirot listened to him in silence. There was no anger in his expression, only a melancholy firmness. The shadow always returns, Monsieur Gardet, no matter how much you run from it. That afternoon, Poirot wrote a short note in his notebook. Case closed, but there will be no scandal. The culprit is already living among the ruins. And he ordered everyone to gather for one last revelation, not of crime, but of truth. Chapter 9. The Final Meeting. The library at the Palais de Bellois was the most solemn place in the house, with high ceilings, dark bookshelves, and a portrait of an ancestor with an inquisitor's face peering down from above the fireplace. That afternoon, all the guests, Claire, the Marquise, Jacques Dupré, Madame Favre, and Inspector Morel, took their seats in a tense semicircle. In the centre, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, was Hercule Poirot. "My lords and ladies," he began in a grave voice, "I've gathered everyone together because the crime committed under this roof can't be explained with physical evidence, but with the little grey cells. And today they've spoken." The Marquise raised her chin. "Do you mean you've found the killer?" "I have, madam. But before I name a person, I must take you back to the beginning," Poirot continued, "to the painting. The Shadow Without, an honoré work attributed to Otto Le Marchand. An unsigned work. Why?" He paused briefly, letting the tension build. "Because it wasn't painted by Le Marchand. It was painted by Claire Beloy." Claire shuddered, but didn't deny it. "My uncle," she said weakly, "asked me. It was his last wish." "Yes, and perhaps it wasn't a crime, but an act of affection. But its existence created a problem. Roche discovered it, and Roche, as was his custom, wanted to capitalize on that truth." Poirot walked slowly, his eyes never leaving the crowd. "We discovered an envelope, hidden behind the frame. It contained a note revealing the falsity of the certificate of authenticity. But what no one asked was, why hide it? And who did it?" He looked at Jacques. "Monsieur Dupré knew it. But it wasn't you who hid the envelope. You In your romanticism, decided not to act. Jacques nodded, embarrassed. Poirot turned to Madame Favre. You argued with Roche. He threatened you, but you didn't kill him. Why? Because Roche hadn't yet touched you directly. His fury was verbal, not fatal. I'm not old enough for struggles, monsieur, she murmured with a sad smile. Poirot nodded. And then there's the Marquise. A woman of impeccable reputation, proud, controlling. Could she have murdered to protect a legacy? The Marquise didn't move. She didn't even blink. I could have, but I didn't. Exactly. You control from the shadows, madame, but you don't act with your hands. You always let others do it. Then Poirot stopped in front of Dr. Gardet. You weren't in the library, doctor. You lied. You were in the octagonal room confronting Roche. Because Roche didn't just have the painting. He had the letter. A letter written by Le Marchand in which he confessed that you were his son. A sudden silence filled the room. Claire stared at him in astonishment. The Marquise paled. Morel frowned. Le Marchand was his mentor, Poirot continued, but also his father. He hid the truth from him. He protected him. But Roche, like a vulture, found out, and threatened to expose everything. Gardet gripped the arms of the chair, making no attempt to defend himself. You didn't plan to kill him, Poirot said gently. It was a fit of anger, a push. The poison bottle tipped over, and Roche, ironically, was killed by a shadow that wasn't his own. Gardet looked up, her eyes moist but dignified. I didn't kill him for me. I killed him because I was going to destroy the memory of a man who gave me a reason to live. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. Then he turned to Morel. Inspector, the motive is clear. The confession too. But the circumstances are human. I'll leave it to your judgment. Morel nodded slowly. He didn't speak yet. Poirot turned to the group. The truth, my friends, doesn't always punish. Sometimes it only liberates. The crime has been solved, but the human soul, that remains the greatest mystery. And with that, he took a step back. Silence fell. A thick, absolute silence, like that before a storm or a definitive peace. Chapter 10. Resolution and Justice. After the revelation in the library, a dense, almost reverential silence fell over the palace. No one spoke as Dr. Gardet slowly rose from his seat. His face, marked by the fatigue of years and the weight of secrets, showed no resistance. Only a sad, resigned dignity. I won't beg for mercy, he told Inspector Morel. My only regret is not having destroyed that letter when I received it. Morel, serious but not insensitive, nodded. With calm gestures, he escorted the doctor out of the room, without handcuffs, without fuss. It was clear to everyone that this was not an act of mechanical justice, but an inevitable closure. No one followed him. No one condemned him with a look. Poirot remained silent for a few more moments, observing the void that Gardet left behind. Was that justice, Monsieur Poirot? The Marquise asked, her voice low and steely. It was a consequence, he replied. Sometimes life corners us with impossible truths. I don't justify the act, madame, but I understand the man. Claire, sitting by the window, had her hands clasped in her lap. Finally, she looked up. So everything I painted was in vain? Poirot approached, his voice softer than ever. No, Mademoiselle, you painted with truth, not the truth of the name you signed, but the truth of the soul that guided your hand. That painting, though born of deception, contains beauty, and no one can take that away from you." Claire let out a pent-up sigh, not of relief, but of mourning. Jacques Dupré approached slowly. He offered her a hand, which she took without a word. Nothing more was needed. Madame Favre stood up with an indecipherable expression. Criticism doesn't redeem, but it can remain silent when art speaks for itself. "A very wise decision," said Poirot, with a slight inclination of his head. Shortly after, each guest began to leave. There were no cocktails or festive farewells, just discreet suitcases, silent cars, and glances that avoided contact, as if each one carried a portion of their shadow with them. That evening, Poirot remained alone on the gallery, in front of the shadow. Without an owner, under the soft light of a floor lamp, he observed the crack that ran through the canvas. Despite the damage, the painting still had a hypnotic power. Even more so now, with everything he knew. "Maybe that crack is what makes it true," he murmured. He turned slowly as the marquise appeared in the doorway, this time without her shawl, just a light wool coat. "Are you leaving tomorrow, Monsieur Poirot?" "Yes, madame. My little grey cells deserve a rest. And this house, too. What will you do with the painting?" The marquise remained thinking. "I'll keep it, not to hide it, but to protect it. Some mirrors aren't meant to be displayed every day." Poirot smiled. "Wise words, madame." The next day, Poirot left Belloy's palace on the first train to Paris. As the Normandy landscape passed by the window, he took out his leather notebook and wrote, "Truth, like art, isn't always clear. It may be signed by someone else's hands, painted with unspoken emotions, but it always finds a way to emerge. And when it does, not even a shadow can hide it. With the train whistle, a case was closed, and a story was framed forever, in an unsigned painting, but with a soul." End Chapter 11. The Last Stroke. Days after leaving Belloy's palace, Poirot found himself in Paris, in a discreet café on the Rue des Martyrs, sipping a finely poured espresso. The morning mist caressed the window panes, and although Paris buzzed like a swarm across the street, an almost theatrical calm reigned inside. In front of him, on the table, lay a gilt-edged envelope. No return address. No stamp. Poirot opened it carefully inside a single sheet. "Thank you for not destroying what still has value. See." Poirot smiled gently. It was a letter without a name, but not without a signature. He leaned back against the chair, closed his eyes for a moment, and remembered not the facts. He'd already arranged those like dominoes, but the emotions between the lines, Gardet's sadness, Claire's restraint, the marquise's unyielding dignity, everything like a composition without a score, but with resonance. Later, in his apartment on the Rue Bonaparte, Poirot received a visit from Inspector Morel, returning from Normandy. The young man brought with him a folder containing official reports, autopsy, statements, conclusions. "Everything fits," Morel said. "Roche died from cyanide ingestion. The flask found had traces of Gardet on it, The fall surprised him, but the death was chemical. There were traces of the poison in his glass as well, indicating he was already poisoned before he fell. Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. So, the doctor didn't kill him in the struggle. He just precipitated the inevitable. And that changes the moral balance. Morel hesitated a moment before speaking. What if someone else poisoned him first? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Ah, Inspector. His mind starts to race. Who would have access to his drink? A servant, or someone who knew him well? The Marquise, perhaps. But to what end, if they were already blackmailing him? Why kill him by poisoning him discreetly, and then provoke a violent scene? Morel shrugged. Maybe it wasn't murder. Maybe it was a warning. Something went wrong. Poirot narrowed his eyes, or a more complex network of hands, a crime shared by mistake. Roche threatened everyone. Claire for the painting, La Marquise for the gallery, Gardet for his identity. Perhaps someone poisoned him, and Gardet, unknowingly, thought she'd killed him with a push. So there's more than one culprit, or neither? Poirot raised a finger. An act of desperation here, an omission there. The result? A corpse. Justice doesn't always distinguish the parts from the whole, but I do. A few weeks later, at Claire Beloy's art gallery in Geneva, an intimate exhibition was opened, Lights and False Reflections. The central square, the shadow without an owner, remained in the background, partially veiled by a translucent gauze. On the plaque, only one word: anonymous. Visitors debated whether it was a new or old work, real or invented, but no one could deny its power. Claire, discreetly among the crowd, noticed a familiar figure in the background. Poirot, impeccable, as ever, nodded from a distance, then turned and left without a word. There was no need. In his diary that evening, Poirot wrote, "A crime without a murderer, a work without a signature, a truth shared by so many that ends up belonging to everyone." And yet, justice was done, not before a court, but before conscience. And with that, the case was closed. For good. Chapter 12, The Shadow That Always had an owner. A month after the Étretat case, Hercule Poirot received an unexpected invitation. It came from the Marquise de Bellois, written in her distinctive sloping handwriting on ivory paper. For one last conversation. I owe you a truth. Poirot travelled with his usual precision, and, as always, arrived exactly 2 minutes before the appointed time. The Marquise received him in her study, this time without the ceremonial air of their previous encounters. He was dressed in black, without jewellery, and his face, though serene, seemed to have lost some of its shield. "Thank you for coming, Monsieur de Poirot," he said without preamble. "I couldn't let this story end without you knowing everything." Poirot sat down, his hands folded on his walking stick. "Everything, madam?" She nodded. "You were right, but you were also wrong. Gardet didn't kill Roche, neither did Claire, nor me." Poirot remained motionless. "I poisoned him, but not to kill him, just to sicken him, to stop him." The poison was diluted, calculated to provoke a violent reaction that would force him to retreat. I had it discreetly added to his glass by my maid, Mireille. Yes, but Gardet, He thought he'd killed him with his own hands, and he let him die. The poison was already beginning to take effect. But it was Gardet's fear, his guilt, that sealed Roche's fate. Poirot remained silent. There was no surprise in his eyes, only an ancient sadness. So, madame, the painting was right. The shadow was never an orphan. It always had an owner. The Marquise turned toward the window where the sea roared in the distance. Everything in this house has an owner, Monsieur Poirot, even mistakes. And Claire? Does she know? No, and she shouldn't. No, she deserves a future without the shadows of my generation. I built everything on beauty, but also on silence. It's time to let the truth breathe. Poirot stood up slowly. When he reached the door, he stopped. Madame, you have done something terrible, and something noble, and with it you have closed a cycle of pain. I won't give you my blessing, but I recognize your courage. She bowed her head, not as a noblewoman, but as a human being. Back in his apartment, Poirot placed the Marquise's letter next to the newspaper clipping about the reopening of the Geneva Gallery. Claire, now artistic director, had announced a new curatorial line, Unsigned Works, Nameless Emotions. Poirot smiled. He took out his diary and wrote the last entry in the case. Justice, like art, does not always reside in the obvious. Sometimes it's in what isn't signed, what isn't said, what isn't demanded. Roche died, yes, but he was killed by many hands. Fear, ambition, protection, truth. In a crime with no single culprit, everyone is responsible, but some choose to carry the shadow, and others finally live in the light. He closed the notebook with a metallic click. He poured himself a cup of tea, let it steep for exactly 3 minutes, and settled into his favourite armchair. The case was over, and Hercule Poirot had once again demonstrated that even in the most refined world, the human soul remains the most complex mystery of all.